It's Thursday, and that means I'm here to do the Mio on MMA podcast. I'm your host, Mio, and today's topic is going to be the upcoming UFC on ABC. I think it's UFC on ABC, right? I got the network right, don't I? Yes, UFC on ABC 3, Ortega versus Rodriguez. Let's start with a note here. This might be a lower energy podcast. This might be a more somber podcast. I'm not going to go into terribly large details on it, but July 14th, which is the day I'm recording this, is a special somber day for me, and it might take the enthusiasm down. But I'm going to try and do my best to push through and make it happen. And this card makes it fairly easy. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some fights that I'm not really looking forward to on this card. The co-main event, I think, is kind of meh. There's another fight on here that is a little bit, just kind of a little bit sad just because of the circumstances around it. The fight itself actually might not be bad. But on the other hand, there's a good main event. There's an excellent fight between the Leech and Muslim Salikov. Matt Schnell versus Sumu Jarji, I think, is going to be a very good fight as well. Shane Burgos and Charles Jourdain is an orgasmic action fight. And even the other fights that are fighters who maybe aren't the most exciting things in the world, like Dwight Grant versus Dustin Stolfus, that might actually be pretty good. So there's a lot to like about this card. And it was also incredibly good when it was originally started, because originally we were going to get Billy Quarantillo and Bill Algeo on the card. Unfortunately, Quarantillo got hurt. We were going to have Askar Askarov versus Alex Perez. That fight fell apart. And even with those losses, even with two very major losses, this is still a really good card. So let's start it off with the main event. Brian Ortega versus Yair Rodriguez. It's kind of weird to think that Yair Rodriguez is actually in title contention. I don't necessarily even disagree with it, but you look at his last five or whatever, and it's not actually that fantastic. I mean, he's 2-1. He has a no contest with Jeremy Stephens in that time. His wins are over Jeremy Stephens and the Korean Zombie, and he had a one-sided beating at the hands of Max Holloway. And a pretty poor effort against Frankie Edgar, to be honest. Mind you, that was back in 2017. He's just not been super active lately. And it does feel bad that this has been portrayed as a number one contenders match for Yair, maybe not for Ortega, and they're going to cut over Josh Emmett on this one. Don't get me wrong, the idea of Volkanovski versus Emmett doesn't fill me with great expectations, or really a thought that Emmett's going to take the belt. But I have no expectations that Yair Rodriguez is going to either. I think Yair Rodriguez, when it comes down to it, is a fairly one-dimensional guy with a diverse kickboxing offense, but he's not exactly going to trouble you with a tremendously deep wrestling game. He's not going to trouble you with a tremendously deep grappling game. So that fight isn't super interesting against Volkanovski either. And it would be nice to see Josh Emmett, with his age and the activity level he's put up, get that title shot. So I'm rooting for Ortega because, frankly, if Ortega does get the title shot, it's a better title shot because he has that X factor that we saw in the first time he fought Volkanovski, which is his ability to take... you're going to hear something. If you're on the YouTube, you're going to hear my headset turning off. But it shouldn't be there for the audio podcast. Anyways, where was I? Anyways, Ortega has actually that X factor, that ability to choke someone, pretty much anyone. Doesn't have to get takedowns, doesn't have to get dominant position. He can pull guillotines. He has an amazing back take game into a rear naked choke, and his striking has been improving every time out, except maybe the Volkanovski fight. Now, to be clear, we just saw Volkanovski completely shut down Max Holloway. So was that Ortega not improving as a striker, or is that just how good Volkanovski is? Probably a little bit of both. Probably a little column A and column B. So how does this fight match up? Obviously, the stand-up is really, really interesting. You would think that that's Yair Rodriguez's world. But I have to say this, I'm not actually convinced that it is. Because if we look at Ortega's performance against the Korean Zombie, Chan Sung Jung, he did immensely well as a striker in that fight. He dominated, frankly. And Korean Zombie was winning the fight with Yair Rodriguez up until getting finished in the 5th round. So, is Yair Rodriguez the better striker? I think he's the more diverse striker. I think he's the better kicker of the two. I think he's the more creative of the two. But I think Ortega has a hard to overlook boxing game that probably can hurt Rodriguez. Probably can give him a hard time. And of course, the ground game undoubtedly is Ortega's. It's not that Rodriguez can't grapple. I think I may have made that seem that way when I said he was one-dimensional. What I mean is that at the top of the division, in terms of an elite game, he's an elite striker who doesn't back that up with elite wrestling or elite grappling. And in theory, that means that should provide openings for Brian Ortega if this fight goes to the ground. He should be able to get positions. He should be able to get submission options. And as a result, I kind of have to go with Ortega. My immediate thought going into this fight is like, okay, if Rodriguez can keep it standing, he's got a shot here. But after watching like the footage, I'm not even certain that that's the case. Not that I think Ortega is going to go out there and destroy him as a striker. No, but I think that there's a threat of a takedown from Ortega that Rodriguez is going to have to address, and that's going to make his striking a lot more conventional, conservative. I think Ortega can deal with that. So I am taking Brian Ortega to, at some point, submit Yair Rodriguez in this fight. Maybe a club and sub, maybe hurt him on the feet, get him to the ground, grapple him there. I don't think a knockout, just because, I mean, we've seen Rodriguez is a damn tough fighter. And Ortega's still not a lethal finisher. He's got good power and good single strikes to hurt people, but I don't trust him to hurt a guy, follow up, and keep it going. So I think if he does hurt him, it'll end up on the ground, and he'll finish him there. So taking Ortega by submission. He is the slight favorite, minus 165 to plus 140, and I wouldn't have it any wider than that, honestly. This is the fight I'm looking forward to the least on the card. Michelle Waterson versus Amanda Lemos. It's mostly that I'm never super amped up for the Michelle Waterson fights. Part of it is that her push is largely related to something that I really wish wasn't a part of MMA, which is the male gaze, essentially. Guys find her hot, therefore she's pushed. I don't, and this is not to say she's not a good fighter. She's well-rounded, has a Sevi veteranness to her that shows her ability to compete in almost any type of fight you put in front of her. Whether it's a hard wrestling game, whether it's a range striking game, whether it's in the pocket, she does compete kind of everywhere. But she's not especially great anywhere, which is kind of weird because with the Karate Hottie nickname, you would have always thought that she would be like a female Wonder Boy to a certain degree. Not necessarily to the same level, but she actually probably honestly gets her best work done in a very non-karate way. In close, with the pocket, into the clinch, into a wrestling game. And Lemos is pretty damn strong. She did get slightly embarrassed in her last fight against Jessica Andrade, but she's a really good grappler, powerful striker. She is ripe to lose a split decision, though, because she has a way, and it's because she's got a kind of low output striking style, that even if you watch her and she's getting the better of every exchange, the fact that she will often be outworked means that there's a legitimate case to be made that she's actually not winning a fight. The Angela Hill fight was a great example of what I mean. I think this is kind of going to be somewhat similar. She won a split decision against Angela Hill, which, given Lamos's physical attributes above Hill, should not have been to happen. It just shouldn't be a split decision fight. She does have a couple of knockouts, of course. She finished Montserrat Ruiz. She finished Liviana Souza. She finished Miranda Granger. Waterson's pretty above all of those as far as like toughness and just defensive ability. I actually don't think. Okay, she has been finished. She was finished by Rose Namajunas. Okay. So there are losses on the record in the UFC of Waterson, but it's only one. And Thug Rose is much more opportunistic, much more finish oriented than I think Lemos honestly is. Lemos is kind of a fighter who finishes you if she's having a very, very easy time, and I don't suspect that'll be the case. So I got Lemos winning by decision, landing harder shots, landing with more power, probably landing less, to be honest, but being able to control Waterson in the clinch, be a physical force, not let Waterson win the style of fight that she's probably best equipped to win, and force her into a more pocket/range exchange game. What is the reach in this fight, actually? 65 inches to 62, so it's not that huge of a difference, but it's enough. And it looks like Vegas is heavily favoring. Actually, a lot more than I expected. Amanda Lemos is minus 400 favorite here against plus 300 of Waterson. That's surprising. Because Waterson, I think, is usually has a better betting line than I think, but I don't think of her as a plus 300 underdog here. She's hard to finish, and Lemos does not have a style that is the most comfortable decision winning style. So that's interesting. I could easily see this going to a split decision. Muslim Salkov versus Jiangling Li, aka The Leech. I really like The Leech. I really like Salakov. They both have interesting fighting styles that are not super normal. I mean, The Leech is somewhat normal. He's kind of got a standard boxing game into a wrestling and jiu-jitsu game. So he's not that unique, but it's the way he applies it. It's the aggression that he has, yet somehow being relatively defensively solid. It's interesting, and I'm actually really intrigued by this fight. I do think The Leech is going to win, but I've also sold Salakov short his entire career. I think I picked against him a large number of times since he came to the UFC. I think actually, ironically, he's only lost in the UFC, which is Alex Garcia. I think I picked him to win. I think I picked him in his first two fights. I picked Nordum Talib to beat him, which did not happen. I did pick him to beat Storopoli because I don't think I've ever picked Storopoli to win a fight, to be honest. And then I picked Zaleski and I picked Trinaldo to beat him. Now, I do actually think that Zaleski did beat him, Capoeira, because I watched that fight again. I scored rounds 1 and 3 for Zaleski, round 2 for Salakov. By no means a robbery. It was a classic split decision fight where how you saw a couple of exchanges definitely could tilt you one way or the other. I just thought that Zaleski had the more damage, and outside of the round where he tried to wrestle Salakov and kind of got shut down, which was the second round, I thought he was controlling the action. The Leech, of course, beat Zaleski as well, finished him. Now, did he finish him? I may have just made an ass of myself. Did he finish him? He did. He finished him in the third round with 9 seconds to go. Right. So I am not wrong. Sorry, there was a sneeze there. Anyways, so you might be thinking, okay, well, they have a common opponent in Zaleski. One of them finished Zaleski. One of them probably lost to Zaleski. You're leaning Leech because of that reason. There is some truth to that. Watching them both fight Zaleski did tell me a lot more about their defensive liabilities and their offensive potential. I think the Leech hits harder. Although Salikov does wind up and throws really hard, I just think that it doesn't quite have the accuracy. It doesn't quite and I think the key is when Salikov throws hard, it's visually telling, meaning that you can prepare for it and you can usually handle it. Whereas the Leech has that ability to throw hard with good fundamentals, meaning that when the Leech throws a hard knockout shot, you don't necessarily know it's a hard knockout shot. Everything Salikov does, you kind of see coming to a certain degree, as in you see a hard strike coming. Not necessarily where it's going to land or necessarily the specific tactics of it, because he does have a very creative game. It's a Sanshao Wushu fighter, Sanda fighter, whatever it's called now, as opposed to a traditional kickboxer or boxer. So there's definitely a lot of creativity there, but I think that the creativity in itself leaves a lot of openings. I think the Leech is actually an underrated counter fighter. I think he can actually land hard and frequently with counter windows. And I think Salikov gives him those windows. And I do think, as much as I think Salikov is exceptionally hard to take down, he's got heavy hips, he's very hard to take down, that if it does go to the ground, the Leech is going to have the advantage. I think the Leech is a stellar grappler. I think Salikov is very much a survival grappler. And, I mean, the fact that the only prolonged grappling exchange he's had in the UFC with Alex Garcia wound up with him being submitted, I think does back that up. So I'm going with the Leech here. I'm going to say by decision because Salikov just is super tough. I don't really see the Leech implying like a tremendous wrestling game on him time after time after time to get a submission. I think just crisper boxing will get the job done. What is the reach like in this fight? Does have a 2.5 inch reach advantage, 72 inches for the Leech, 69.5 for Salikov. So interesting. They got Salikov listed working with Nova U now. That would be intriguing if that is accurate. I don't remember that being the case. What are the odds on that fight? I'm always intrigued by the odds because it says, interesting, the Leech is the underdog at plus 150 to minus 175 for Salikov. I don't think that's at all ridiculous. Salikov is 18-2. He's on a hell of a run. He's, what's this? 1, 2, 3, 5 fight winning streak, 5-1 in the UFC. But I still haven't been 100% convinced by him, I guess. Flyweight action, Matt Schnell versus Sumadarji. Sumadarji is a surprisingly large favorite here at minus 250 to plus 200 for Matt Schnell. Now, I will say, I am picking Sumadarji to win. But I think that's too wide. Because when it comes down to it, Matt Schnell would be by far the best win that Sumadarji has got. Sumadarji's on a good run right now, including the knockout of Malcolm Gordon. He beat Zaruk Adashev, but Adashev's not that good. He beat Andrei Sukumta. Sukumta's got more than a handful of problems, realistically speaking, because Sukumta's problem predominantly is, while he has all the physical attributes you would want, a heavy-hitting guy, actually has a pretty reasonable wrestling game, he's super low output, supremely low output, and does not gauge distance very well, and Sumadarji used that to his advantage. But I will admit, my faith in Matt Schnell has been the most inconsistent thing, I guess, coming into this card. There are times when I really think Matt Schnell is turning into something, that his work ethic will make up for the fact that he's not super athletic, but he is very technical. He is tall and sometimes utilizes his reach very well and is incredibly scrappy. And that's a fighter I usually really, really like. But then he also shows periods where He's fragile. And worse yet, there are periods where he seems kind of unsure of himself. Just not comfortable in the cage. The fight he had with Rodrigo Bontorin, or Rogerio Bontorin, pardon me, was a great example of that. Just a fight where he never seemed that comfortable, even though some people thought he won that fight. But it's interesting, of course. Schnell has a win over Louis Smolka, who beat Sumudarji. So MMA math would suggest that he's going to win this fight. But it does feel like I don't ever feel comfortable picking Matt Schnell. And I do think that Sumudarji's really building something. He's looked very sharp lately. Good on the counter, good on the lead, good at range, good at the pocket. Still have questions about his grappling credentials, but Schnell is not. Schnell is a willing grappler, but not really someone who's going to force you to grapple with him. And that is why this does feel like the one thing that is kind of missing from Schnell's game. If there was a more persistent ability to dictate where the fight was happening, I'd probably feel a lot more comfortable about him in fights in general, and this fight in specific. But I am going to take Sumudarji. Does he finish him? That's the question, because Schnell has been finishable. Sumudarji's not. Well, okay. He is a finisher. Like most of his wins are finishes. Malcolm Gordon. The problem is that Malcolm Gordon is the only name you're going to recognize that he has finished. And Malcolm Gordon is really finishable. So I'm going to say decision, because I'm not going to be picking Sumudarji to start finishing people until I see him finish somebody who has skills and is durable. And this is flyweight. There's not a ton of finishes usually. Shane Burgos versus Charles Jourdain. Yes, please. This is amazing. Okay, so the immediate thing that catches my eye is we're talking about a 75.5-inch reach to a 69-inch reach. So 6.5 inches in favor of Burgos. Burgos has a lot of flaws as a striker that are going to limit him forever. Because defensively, there's no head movement. There's just bad defensive technique. He is there to get hit constantly if you can defeat his range. Thing is that Jourdain kind of is the same defensive liabilities. Not great head movement, not great defensive instincts, not great defensive technique. So both guys are going to get hit a ton. Both guys have excellent chins. Both guys don't necessarily have a substantial one-punch knockout power, although Burgos's is nominally higher by quite a bit, actually. And both guys make up for their defensive flaws by fighting at like a high output rate. Where it's like, okay, you're going to hit me, but I'm going to hit you more. And that just, to me, leads this to being just a spectacular fight. But I got to take Burgos. Burgos has a little bit more physicality to him, hits a little harder, has that extra reach. So that means he is going to be able to hit Jourdain before Jourdain can hit him. Jourdain will get inside, will get some stuff done, but I do think he'll get knocked out. Would that be Jourdain's first ever knockout loss? Question mark? Did get rocked by Julian Erosa, but in the end he was submitted with a Darce choke. By the way, that fight does kind of also paint a picture, because Jourdain did not have the easiest of times dealing with the long range and the long reach of Erosa. Granted, I think Erosa has an even longer reach than Burgos does. Like, Burgos is really long, but it does feel like maybe Erosa's is longer because Erosa is taller. Yeah, Erosa is 6'1". But no, actually, Burgos has the longer reach of the two by a full inch. Wow. Interesting. Burgos is favored at -190 to +160 for Jourdain. And then we get into the sort of sad fight. And I say this because I always wonder when a fighter comes out of a long-term retirement and someone who seems like they should have been making money outside of fighting. That's Meisha Tate. Came back, she beat Marion Renault and then lost to Ketlin Vieira, and now she's going down to 125. I don't necessarily know if it's a good idea. She never seemed like somebody who had a lot of weight to lose to get down another weight class. But she's been showing the pictures on Instagram and stuff, and it looks fine. So I'm not worried about the weight loss. It's just that I watched that Ketlin Vieira fight again, and I want 15 minutes of my life back. But at the same time, it wasn't size. It's just Meisha Tate kind of still is what she was at the beginning of the women's MMA boom in the Ronda Rousey era. And it feels like women's MMA has passed her by as an elite talent. And while Lauren Murphy certainly did not do very well in her title match against Valentina Shevchenko, she is coming off of that title shot. I think this is her first fight since then. And she's the underdog. What the hell? It's not the biggest, it's not the most convincing argument I've ever had, frankly. But it's just that since coming back, I don't think Tate's fast enough. I don't think Tate's good enough at pushing a wrestling game anymore. Her striking never honestly was a high point. I gotta take Murphy. Probably by decision, because Murphy's not a great finisher. But if your game plan is to outgrind Lauren Murphy, it's not generally been a great way to win. And if your game plan is and if Meisha Tate's game plan is to stay at pocket range and strike with Murphy, that's historically not really been a path to victory for her either. So, there you go. I'm not looking forward to that fight. Punahele Soriano versus Dolce Lungiambula. I am actually looking forward to this fight. These are both really flawed fighters when it comes down to it. Like a lot of athletic ability. Like a ton of athletic ability for both of them. But at the same time, not the most structured game on the planet. Not the best fight IQ either. Both of them will do the exact things that their opponent needs them to do. Lungiambula versus Brundage, a great example of that. Punahele Soriano versus Nick Maximo, also a good example of that. But I do think Soriano's the better striker of the two. My phone is going off. I'm going to mute that. My apologies. Boom. I should have muted that a while ago, actually. There's a lot of people messaging me. A lot of family members. But anyways. Yeah, Soriano just like a bit better at like every aspect of striking, realistically. Like Lungiambula is fast. Lungiambula is powerful. He's big. Has I think a pretty notable reach. He has 76 inches. Despite being only 5'8". But at the end of the day, Soriano's a little cleaner technique. I think he has comparable levels of striking. And it's not like we've ever seen Lungiambula really outstrike somebody who has good striking and good athleticism. Like, what's the best striker that Lungiambula has outstruck? Marcus Perez? That's probably it. Otherwise, coming off losses to Barrio and Brundage, he was looking great against Brundage, but Brundage is, despite his 2-1 record, not great. Taking Soriano by decision. He's a minus 270 favorite, plus 220 on Lungiambula. Makes sense. Feels about right. Ricky Simon versus Jack Shore. I am looking forward to this. I'm always looking forward to Jack Shore's fights. He is just, he's an all-around prospect. He's not supremely athletic, but he's athletic enough. He's got that scrappy heart in him. He's kind of got like a much more consistent and probably better structured game than Matt Schnell, who we talked about a little bit ago. Like that's who he kind of reminds me of. But where Schnell doesn't have the ability to like dictate things, Shore does. Shore's built a game better on that. But I have to say this. What does Jack Shore look like against somebody who wants to wrestle him and is probably better at it? We haven't really had that question answered. Ricky Simone is a machine. Super deep cardio. Super persistent wrestling game. And that's kind of the thing is like a lot of Shore's wins tend to be based on the ability to control some of the wrestling exchanges and also to just go deeper from a cardio standpoint than his opponent. And I don't really think he can do that against Simone. So I'm going to take Ricky Simone by decision. Not really a finisher. And I mean, Shore has never lost, so obviously he's never been finished. And I don't see any like super obvious openings, but it does feel like Simone's had just that slightly higher quality of win. Like, yes, beating Rafael Suncow right now in 2020 or in 2021, not that impressive. Gaetano Perello, not that impressive. But beating Ray Borg, beating Brian Kelleher, yes, losing to Rob Font and embarrassingly losing to Uriah Faber in 2019 is a bit of a problem. But you look at a win over Montel Jackson even before that, and Merab Dvalishvili. These are guys that want to employ similar-ish games to Shore, although Shore is a much better striker. That's, I guess, the one concern is Shore can replicate a lot of what Rob Font had working for him. It's just I don't think he does it with the same comfort, the same footwork, and the same athletic ability, the same physicality. I just think that Shore's game, to a certain degree, is baked into getting close enough that Simone's gonna be able to wrestle him. And we haven't really seen that result in a loss yet. I guess that's the Faber loss, but let's put that out of our minds. Simone is the underdog. I'm not surprised by that. Obviously, Shore is undefeated. So minus 165 for Shore, plus 140 for Simone. Feels about right. Bill Algeo versus Herbert Burns. The question is how much of Daniel Pineda's performance can Bill Algeo bring to the table while having none of Pineda's physical abilities? But being way more persistent than Pineda, less self-destructing, and with a much deeper cardio game. That's the question. Have I ever seen Bill Algeo beat someone who's a better grappler than him, though? And I do think Burns is. This feels more like the Ricardo Ramos fight, I guess. Like, or even the Ricardo Lamas. Ricardo Ramos and Ricardo Lamas, actually. Ricardo's all the way. He kind of, in large parts, actually got out-wrestled and beaten by Spike Carlisle. And if it wasn't for the fact that Spike Carlisle is an absolute meme fighter, an absolutely insane human being, probably would have won the fight. I just see Burns being able to be on top in the scrambles, out-grapple Algeo, and if Algeo can't out-grapple you, even if he is a better striker than you, he doesn't have the ability to stop you from grappling with him. And that is why I have to go with Herbert Burns. But, Burns is taking this on short notice. 1. And 2, Burns can get lazy. And if there's someone you don't want to give any opportunities to, it's Bill Algeo. Because he will scramble. He will chase basically anything. And but it's just not enough firepower on the feet to actually hurt Burns, I don't think. And a lot of what Pineda was able to do against Burns was essentially based on his own horsepower. And Algeo just doesn't really have that. I'm surprised to see Algeo as a favorite. I mean, I know Burns is coming in as a short notice replacement, but I still. I guess that's the other question. Burns did miss weight last time. I do kind of feel like Burns might want to really just consider doing 155 a lot more often. It does feel like kind of like his brother Gilbert that he probably actually is trying to go to a weight class too low. But I mean, he made it against Nate Landwehr. I'm not going to worry about it. I think even if he does miss the weight, Algeo just doesn't have the ability to hurt him in the way that Pineda did. But if he does miss weight again, I could see him getting forced up to 155. I don't think it would necessarily be that bad of a thing. Like, I think he's big enough for that weight class. So, anyways, Burns. Yes, Burns somehow has more reach than Algeo, and I refuse to believe that. 73.5 for Algeo and 74 inches for Burns. Burns is 5'9". Algeo is 6 feet tall. How on earth would you have a reach advantage in that matchup? Dusty Jacoby versus Da Un Jung. Jacoby's the favorite, minus 140 to plus 120. Makes sense. I am picking Jacoby here. I'm picking Jacoby on the basis of I still don't know what to make of Da Un Jung. He had that super impressive knockout of Kennedy Nzechukwu, which I don't know why I have such a hard time with that name. I am sorry to anyone who is of Nigerian heritage for me butchering that name repetitively. I don't know what it is. It's not an African name thing because normally actually hasn't really been that big of a problem. But anyways, very impressive win there. Very impressive win against Mike Rodriguez, but then like kind of a really like a draw with Sam Alvey and then like the anti fight IQ performance to a win over William Knight. It's just kind of weird. Don't know what to make of him. Like we've seen powerful, solid boxing technique. We've seen admittedly very repetitive wrestling game against William Knight. We've seen good footwork and good power. We've seen flashes of a lot of things, but I've not. His two good performances are just first round knockouts. I don't think he knocks out Jacoby in the first round. I think Jacoby takes this deep. Jacoby's tough, has excellent cardio, has a very good striking game of his own, and I am hoping, and admittedly this may be a futile hope, that if Jung ties up with him and tries to do a Polish throw constantly, that Jacoby will be able to counter that and like learn to defend it. I'm hoping that he's done a third grade or a like high school level game planning session to handle this. And I am taking him, but Jung's got a lot of power. I really want everything to come together for him. I do, because I think there's a really good fighter there. I just haven't been convinced that it is coming together. Dwight Grant going up to 185 is my understanding to fight Dustin Stolfus. It was interesting because Stolfus, I kind of feel like might actually want to consider going down to 170 if he can. He seems kind of small at 185, which makes this an excellent choice for Dwight Grant. I'm surprised Dwight is I guess I'm not surprised that Dwight is the favorite. I guess Stolfus has lost 3 in a row in the UFC. This is a different matchup than he's had before because he's predominantly fought grapplers. Like he fought Kyle Daukaus, he fought Ronaldo Vieira, and he fought Gerald Meerschaert, who are obviously all very grappling heavy fighters. But we've also seen his stand-up. We saw it on we saw it on the Dana White Contenders series. We saw it against Daukaus at times. We saw it against Vieira. He got outstruck by Vieira. He did look better against Gerald Meerschaert on the feet. Got some things going. He had a more lively left hand or lead hand. I believe he's left hand forward. And and threw a little bit more in combination. It looked like some things were going on there, but I'm not sure how much of that is just that, Mershaert is a notably unathletic fighter. That's the thing. He's also fought like a lot of notably unathletic fighters in Dacus and Mershaert, who are probably the best non-athletes in the division. And really, he didn't really have anything for Vieira. So I'm going to go with Dwight Grant. Dwight Grant's biggest problem is that he is super low output. But on the Dana White Contender Series, we saw that Stolfus doesn't necessarily punish that all that much. And middleweight will probably be a better place. Who is the more busy fighter of this two? Because there's a lot of inactivity in Stolfus's game. There's a lot of single shot stuff. Just looking at the UFC stats. Significant strikes landed per minute. Dwight Grant, 3.26 to 2.87. Wow. He is actually probably the busier fighter of these two. That's kind of horrifying. Because Dwight Grant has never been the busier fighter than the guy he's fighting, at least in the UFC. Maybe in some regional promotion. Yeah. I'm still going to go with Grant. Decision. Stolfus is tough, but Stolfus is just not particularly athletic and not particularly great at anything. Like, he's okay at everything. He is an okay grappler. He is an okay wrestler. He is okay in the clinch. He is okay in the pocket. It's actually kind of crappy at range. But Grant, unless 185 is just way too big for him, he should be able to get this done. And he is the favorite coming into this fight. I'm surprised that Emily Ducati is the favorite going into the fight against Jessica Penne, because I'm seeing minus 135 on her, plus 115 on Penne. Maybe I'm just underrating the competition she fought in Invicta, but I'm actually taking Penne. Penne is not the greatest fighter in the world, but she does have 3 inches of reach and 3 inches of height. She is an excellent jiu-jitsu player, and despite being at the age of 39, it looks like she's physically still very much there. She doesn't look faded. She doesn't look washed at all. She's got a good range game, and she's got a good grappling game. Now, the connecting tissue there of like pocket and wrestling have never been the best, and she's actually pretty punishing in the clinch. She got thrown around a lot by Lupita Godinez, but largely prevented Godinez from actually establishing a lot of control in the clinch. I just think she's too long. She'll outstrike Ducati at range, and if it goes to the ground, I think she'll out-grapple her. I'm not a big fan of Ducati. I'm happy to see her get a UFC shot. It's well-deserved. It's well-earned. But it's going to take watching her get a victory in the cage before I really buy her as a UFC level strawweight. Strawweight's a deep division. It's a tough place to be. And Penne's hung around there for a long time, even if a lot of that was on suspension for drug failure. She's had 3 canceled fights. Wow, they booked her against Pinheiro twice, and of course this one was supposed to be Brianna Fortino, who pulled out. You should pull out twice against Pinheiro. Interesting. It's a waste of Pinheiro. I feel like they could do. I feel like I every time I do like post fight like predictions for like who should fight who in the strawweight division, Pinheiro's name comes up, and she's just someone I would like to see fight in interesting fights, because I think there are a lot of interesting fights for her. I wouldn't think Pena is really one of them. Anyways, that's the fights. Not really much else happening that I've noticed in the MMA landscape right now. So it's a short episode today. Good fight card. Won't be watching it live. I'll be at a football game, but I will watch it later. So the recap might be delayed until like Monday as opposed to Sunday. As per usual, check out the Discord. Link down below. Follow me on Twitter. There will be career mode fights tonight in the Discord sim, or in the Discord server with the MMA sim. I didn't do it yesterday after promising to do it. So it will be today. It will be tonight. And there's also going to be some interesting stuff about the slam ball sim tonight as well. Plus, usual talk with the MMA, the fan club here about MMA. And there's a lot of interesting fight nerds on the server. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope it wasn't too low energy today.